Hello everybody and welcome back to more political chatter. In this video we will be talking about the very critical Montana Senate race in 2024. This race in Montana could very well which party controls the entirety of the U.S. Senate. So as of right now, the the seats that we know how they are going to vote. The Republicans have 50, the Democrats have 42. Now, Democrats are heavily favored. They have incumbents and are heavily favored in Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. They don't have an incumbent in Michigan, but there's a very weak Republican nominee. The Democrats are also likely to hang on to Maryland despite a very strong Republican challenger. It's just too much of a Democratic state to go red. And then Ruben Gallegos bringing in so much money in Arizona, and the Republican nominee Kari Lake is so weak that I don't know how the Democrats could possibly lose that race. And then you've got the state of Ohio, where Trump won by 9% in 2020. 8% in 2020. But we do have a Democratic incumbent senator from the state of Ohio. And against the now Republican nominee, Bernie Moreno, he leads by 11% in one poll. He leads by 4% in another, and 6% in another. So he leads in all three polls that have been conducted between him and his Republican challenger. But even without polls alone, I would say that Ohio does go blue. I think that Sherrod Brown, or it's not even that, I think that Bernie Moreno is far too extreme to be a strong candidate, and he is just a weak candidate throughout. So that leaves the state of Montana to decide who controls the U.S. Senate. If Republicans win it, that's 51 seats. That is an outright majority. But if Democrats win, then they actually could somehow retain control of the U.S. Senate if they also win the presidency, since the vice president casts the tie-breaking vote. So, Montana, to say the least, is extremely critical for Senate control in 2024, and it is probably the race that we need to look out for the most. And that is because, believe it or not, if you know anything about Montana, you know that they voted for Donald Trump by an overwhelming margin in 2020, 16.5% to be exact. But they voted for Trump by 8%. But Montana has a Democratic incumbent senator, Jon Tester, who is running for re-election. And this is in a state that Trump won by 16.5%. 16.5%. It's not 8%. It's more than double that, 16.5%. It is a safe Republican state, but Jon Tester won his race in 2018 for re-election by 3.6%, and he's hoping to replicate something like this in 2024, since he is running for another term. Now, just a quick breakdown of this race. Jon Tester has much more money than his Republican opponent, Tim Sheehy, and the nomination of Tim Sheehy is very critical, of course, in this race, because Tim Sheehy has some problems as a candidate, and through, Jon Tester is just a much stronger general election candidate than Tim Sheehy is. I mean, if this was a state where it was just about 50-50, even between Democrats and Republicans, Jon Tester would win by a lot. But since Montana is such a Republican state, the weakness of Tim Sheehy, he kind of has some leverage there. He kind of can afford to be somewhat of a weak candidate. But how much support can he afford to lose because of his weakness as a candidate? We will have to see the outcome of this election. But as I was saying before, Jon Tester does have the money at least. He raised $8 million in just the first quarter. I mean, $8 million in a quarter is pretty solid. I mean, it's not something that would deserve its own video. This isn't record breaking. This isn't historic at all. But $8 million is solid, especially when you consider the fact that he has $11.2 million cash on hand. He has raised $25 million, spent $14 million, and Tim Sheehy, if we go to his fundraising numbers, we could see that he has only raised $5 million and he has spent $4 million, much less than Jon Tester. And despite that, he only has $1.2 million cash on hand. Again, that's 11.2 to 1.2. That is a $10 million difference. And if you look, and I know this will narrow up, right? I mean, Jon Tester, of course, initially, the first part of the year, he will get more fundraising because we know that he is going to be the nominee. While in Tim Sheehy's race, donors would be reluctant to donate to him so quickly because earlier this year he had a brief primary challenge from Matt Rosendale, who is a U.S. representative. It literally lasted a couple of days because Trump endorsed Sheehy on the day Matt Rosendale announced. So, whatever, the point I'm trying to make is that donors would be much more reluctant to donate to a Republican in a very critical race that we don't even know would be the nominee yet, right? I mean, they're like the same politically, basically. Anyone donating to these people, any major donors, would only be donating to pick up the Senate seat, right? They don't care if it's Matt Rosendale or Tim Sheehy. So this will go up, right? But it's 1.2 to 11.2 million. It's not even close. Jon Tester has $10 million more dollars than Tim Sheehy does right now. And what we learned from 2022, we talk about how Democrats need to campaign on abortion. Abortion is always a winning issue for Democrats. Now, that's not really compatible for a state like Montana, which is deeply conservative, and Jon Tester is trying to run the most centrist or center-right campaign that he possibly can. But what we also learned from 2022 is that money matters. I mean, in just race after race after race, you'll see that Democrats were so much better well-funded. I mean, they were well-funded across the board and in every state. In every critical Senate race, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, you will see that Democrats had millions of more dollars than Republicans did in those races, and the Democrats ended up winning all of them. They won, basically all of the critical races in the country. The only critical Senate race they lost was Wisconsin, and you'll see there the Democrat only outnumbered the Republican in money by a couple 10,000 or something. It was just about even. And that is the one Senate race, the one critical Senate race that the Democrats lost. The one where they had just about as much money as the Republicans. But in all the others where they were much better funded, had millions of more dollars, sometimes tens of millions of more dollars of cash on hand, they won those seats. And that goes for House elections, that goes for governor races, that goes for Senate races. So, so the money game, Jon Tester is winning. The scandal game, the weakness of a candidate themselves, Jon Tester is winning that race by a mile. And that is because there appears to be these strange I wouldn't even call them scandals really, but just these strange concerning, I will say, concerning stories about this Tim Sheehy, the Montana Republican candidate for Senate. It came out recently that he had lied about how he received a gunshot wound. He said that he had been shot in the battlefield, but in reality he had accidentally shot himself. His firearm accidentally discharged on himself. And then he apparently was involved in a plane crash that resulted in innocent fatalities. And the list goes on and on and on. And he has like an internet history, a pretty negative internet history that can be used against him. And this guy, I mean, you really wouldn't think it. I mean, he initially seemed like a pretty solid candidate, like much better than Matt Rosendale, that the Republicans were putting up, and it was looking like that he could pretty easily flip the seat. But now there are all these stories coming out about his past, and he doesn't appear to be the strong candidate that we initially thought he would be. So that is very interesting, and that can definitely be used against him in a general election campaign. And while we're on the subject of candidate strength, candidate likability and all that, I'll mind you that Jon Tester is just about as normal of a politician as you could possibly get, which always results in them being a good candidate. I mean, we saw that in 2022 with the Pennsylvania Senate race. John Fetterman was just your average type of guy, while Dr. Oz was an elitist, a rich millionaire elitist. And Fetterman drilled that into people's heads, and he won by a lot. He won by 5%. Jon Tester, I mean, if he gets the message through, I mean, he is a real Montanan, if that's what they're called. I mean, he has a farm. He always posts videos of him farming. I mean, he is just about as normal as you can get. I mean, he's been spotted at the airport in just like a flannel T-shirt and all this stuff. But Jon Tester, through and through, is a very likable and strong politician. And Jon Tester really fits Montana values. And it's surprising to a lot of people that he's even a Democrat. But he has a moderate record. But he has a lot to campaign on. That is what I'm trying to get at. But so we've been talking about all of this about this race and how Jon Tester is favored in a lot of ways. How Tim Sheehy is a very weak candidate. How he has a bunch of scandals and a bunch of negative stories. And we talked about how Jon Tester has 10 million more dollars than he does of cash on hand. He has 11.2 million. Tim Sheehy has 1.2 million. So all of those signs would point towards a pretty healthy Jon Tester win. But that is just not the case because of partisan politics. I will remind you, in 2020, Donald Trump won the state of Montana by 16.4%. 16.4 is a very significant margin. And yes, Jon Tester was able to win in 2018 by a very narrow margin, by 3.6%, against an arguably pretty weak candidate, Matt Rosendale. I mean, he is a pretty weak candidate. He has a very weak electoral record, and he only won by 3.6%. But that was in a midterm election. That was in 2018. There was no presidential election held on the same ballot. This was a midterm election, and this was a blue wave midterm election. You'll see that Democrats won West Virginia, which, voted for Trump by, I don't even know, 39 points, maybe something like that, some 40 points. They won Pennsylvania by 13%. They won Wisconsin by 8. Michigan by 6. They almost won Florida. It was decided by 0.12%. It's just about even. So this was a blue wave of a midterm election. And if you'll go to the House elections, it's even more apparent how much of a blue wave it was. But still, it was a midterm and a blue wave. Remember, this was Trump's presidency, who was an unpopular president nationwide. Trump was. Now the role is flipped. We have a Democrat president who is also incredibly unpopular. And not to mention, this time around, it's not a midterm, it is on the presidential election ballot. They will be, Republicans will turn out in droves to vote for Donald Trump for a second term, for another term in office. And that will really increase the Republican voter turnout in this election, in the Senate election in Montana. That will really bring a lot more votes for Tim Sheehy, because that brings a lot more Republicans to the polls. It encourages Republicans to turn out more. Trump being on that ballot helps Tim Sheehy through and through, especially since Trump endorsed Sheehy. So Jon Tester, more money, more likable, less scandals, just a better candidate, just a stronger candidate. But that could all just be diminished. That could all not have any matter. I mean, of course, it will matter. But that the fact that Montana is so heavily Republican, and that it is on a presidential ballot this year, it is being held with the presidential election in Montana, that will make this race very much a challenge for Democrats. So honestly, I have had so much trouble calling this race in these recent months because I just really don't know. For a while this year, in the beginning of this year, I said Tim Sheehy would win. And then I kind of, very recently as yesterday, I thought that Jon Tester could actually narrowly pull this race through, considering the money, considering all of these new scandals with Tim Sheehy. And I think I would actually stick with that belief. I would say that Jon Tester is maybe just a little bit favored, but I couldn't call that confidently. I couldn't call this race anywhere near confidently. I think that this one will be very, very close and one to watch. And again, it is so, so, so important for Senate control. I'm very confident. I'm seriously very confident on all of these other races. I am very confident that every other race, besides Montana, will go how I have it characterized right now. I would be shocked if a race went the other way. But Montana, I'm really, really, really unsure on, and it matters so, so much in Senate control. So thank you all for watching this video. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe. Don't know why I struggled saying that. If you enjoyed, leave a comment if you want. Leave a like. I really appreciate hearing you guys' feedback. Helps out a lot in the algorithm too. If you leave a like or a subscription. Again, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.